Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is When Success Isn't Enough. Merrill Breakaways Make the Case for Independence. It's a conversation with Todd Stankiewicz, President and CIO, and Joe Castiglie, COO and CIO of SYKON Capital. I'm Jason Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for Financial Advisors.
At Diamond Consultants, we help elite advisors identify the right environment for their businesses to thrive, whether that's at a wirehouse, boutique, or independent firm. With nearly 3 decades of experience, we've guided thousands of advisors and represented more than $250 billion to get assets transitioned. And each year, 1 in 4 advisors managing $1 billion or more who change firms are our clients. Our process is education-driven and based on building relationships, starting as your strategic partner well before you're even thinking of a move. To schedule a confidential conversation, call us at 908-879-1002. Wondering why advisors change firms and where they're headed? Are transition deals going up or down? Those very questions and more inspired us to create our annual Advisor Transition Report. It's the award-winning, data-driven resource designed for advisors that connects the dots between the motivations around movement and the firm's appetite for top talent. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need to make smart decisions. Download your copy at diamond-consultants.com/transition report.
For many advisors, success inside a wirehouse is easy to measure: assets, production, growth. But what happens when those metrics no longer define fulfillment? Today's conversation explores what it looks like when 2 successful Merrill advisors realized that growth alone wasn't the real measure of success, and that delivering true peace of mind required a broader toolkit than the traditional model allowed. Todd Stankiewicz and Joe Castiglie found that after years inside the wirehouse world, they made the decision to launch their own RIA, SYKON Capital, and build a firm grounded in full control, from investment philosophy to client experience to culture. In this episode, we unpack how their definition of success evolved over time, why an introduction to the independent community changed their perspective, and what it really means to combine institutional investment management with behavioral insight in a fully independent model. For advisors who are successful where they are, but quietly wondering if there's more on the other side, this conversation will challenge how you define control, growth, and impact. So let's do it. Todd, Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Thrilled to have you here today.
Jason, thank you for having us.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely. Before we get to the launch of SYKON Capital, which is your current chapter, I want to set the stage a little bit. Give us your background and what brought you to the world of wealth management. Todd, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I kind of fell into this world by accident. It goes back a long time when I was probably 23, 24 years old. And I had a friend who was a recruiter and he goes, "Oh, I have this great bond firm up in Greenwich, Connecticut. You should go join and talk to." And I thought it was going to be selling savings bonds. I didn't know bond from anything. I was going to go to medical school. And long and behold, I worked with some really great guys there and became a bond geek. And that's actually how I met Steve when I moved over to Smith Barney. We bonded over our love for bonds, so to speak. And really the rest is history as we look forward. But when we look at moving from just focusing on bonds to getting into the world of wealth management, I knew that there had to be more than just saying, okay, there's an investment opportunity for someone or there's an investment solution for someone. It's why are you investing? How do we solve for what that problem is? And that's really what's brought us all the way from the day of selling municipal bonds to people to the day of really creating a comprehensive wealth management firm that's gone deeper than we ever imagined we could in this space.
It's a great answer. Joe, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of my background. I came to the team a little later than Todd. I started my career out at JP Morgan in equity derivatives and then progressed from there. But eventually it just seemed to me like the wealth space was just going to be a better spot for me. And like Todd said, right, we're trying to address problems for people. And sometimes when you're in that institutional space, it's a little different. The problems are maybe a little bigger, but it's less of a personal touch, right? In the wealth space, you get that personal aspect to things where you're really helping people deliver for them and their family. Joining the team was just the next logical step for me. And then, like Todd said, we just looked at the market and felt that there needed to be something better out there. And there was something better out there. And that's why we decided to do this.
It jives with a lot of, I think, origin stories, especially wirehouse breakaways. I think it's sort of the natural evolution of things, right? You feel successful in a lot of ways, but then I think what you're alluding to is you feel like almost the need to build a better mousetrap because client needs evolve, your views evolve. One of the things I think about is, and we've been hearing this a lot from advisors, their definition of success has changed over time. Tell me a little bit, before we go to your independent journey at Merrill, what did success look like in your early days? And then as you were contemplating leaving, how did you redefine your definition of success?
It's a very interesting question because I think that was where we struggled so much. When you're in the wirehouse environment or a more captive environment like that, your goals and your success are defined by the firm you work for in many cases. They're going to tell you, hey, this is what you have to do. This is how you do it. This is the way that we want you to deliver it. And you got to fall within these guidelines and do that. Or for example, there's repercussions to doing that. And we'll just kind of leave it there. For us, we had a bigger picture and a bigger vision of what we wanted that to look like and how we wanted to help people. Because my vision of success is seeing that impact of helping people achieve their goals. We say that so arbitrary, but when I look at the client who is 60 years old, who separated with their job for a number of different reasons and calls us and is like, do I have to go take the first job I need? Do I have to go take this job? Do I need this income? And we could turn around and say, no, go sailing for the next 6 months. Wait for whatever job you want, that you want to achieve. And by the way, you don't have to worry about the income because we know you can make it. Any income you get's icing on the cake. Right? For him to go back and say, you know what? That's awesome. That's what I'm going to go do. To give someone that freedom of choice in their life and that comfort knowing that they can achieve that is what my definition of success is. But to be able to do that in a really holistic way, which gets thrown around this industry, a lot of times we had to invoke a lot of tools and a lot of areas of expertise that we couldn't necessarily employ if we were at a more captive firm where our area had this kind of stay in our lane, so to speak. We had to just do the asset allocation and handle the investments. You had to really reach outside to be able to deliver that kind of experience to that client. And for me, that's what I look at success. And we're seeing that more and more in this day and age as we're at SYKON as compared to where we were in our predecessor. So finally, for us, it's feeling fulfilled. It's feeling like we're making a difference and having an impact on people and their lives.
Thank you. And Joe, I want to get your perspective on this in a second. Let me tell you why I asked that question. I feel like in the past month in particular, we have heard from advisors more than ever, and even more than that, let's say the past year, saying things like, I'm incredibly successful, I'm crushing it. And when they say successful, they're talking about assets growth, revenue growth, generating a lot of money or new business. But there's something missing, either in the client service or ability to do something, or a lot of times it's more just like a feeling, like I don't feel fulfilled. And I think the wirehouses would answer, I know, because we've asked a lot of the wirehouse leaders this on our podcast, their answer to this would be, but our advisors are growing like crazy. And I think what I hear you saying, Todd, is, but that doesn't necessarily equate to happiness or fulfillment or contentment. So Joe, maybe I'd throw that to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. I think as I listened to Todd give that answer, obviously we talk all the time. So this is something we're very aligned on. But the overwhelming theme that's in there to me is you're trying to bring peace of mind to clients, right? And when you're trying to do that, you can't look at things in a myopic way, right? And sometimes I think that's the issue in the more captive environment, right? Is that you don't have the tools to truly look at the entire picture for people. And so then you're providing this advice that it only goes so far. And I think what happens is a lot of these bigger successful advisors that you're talking about, you get to a certain point and you come to that realization, whether you're talking RIAs or whatever it may be, you interact with other people in the industry and you start to see, wow, there's so many things that I could be doing in addition to what I'm doing that actually provides that peace of mind for my clients and my families. And I think that's really, for me, that's where the real measure of that success comes into play.
Can I ask you to think back on that moment? And I know it's a couple years past now, but was it like one day you walked into the office and the two of you looked at each other like a light switch flipped and it's like, we can't do this or was this like a slow build progression over time?
There was a moment in 2016 when I was traveling around the country and I was talking a lot at events. And at these events, there were very few wirehouse advisors. I think it was actually one of the only wirehouse advisors at these events. And I was there with a lot of RIAs. And afterwards, I would sit around the tables and talk to these individuals. And as I would sit to them, one day, I was in Chicago when I was at this table with a bunch of different individuals who ran RIAs. A lot of them were ETF issuers and other things like that. And I was sitting around the table and I was like, this is the community I belong in. And I knew from that day forward, I was like, you know what? This is where we need to go. I mean, this is where the future of the industry is going, but I knew this is where I belonged. And subsequently, Joe and Steve and Julie and all them were so aligned on everything that I knew that they would, once we got to talking, they felt the same thing too. It's just a way you look at the world, it's a way you think about things. And I think in that moment, what really drove it was that I said to these guys something like, I don't really want you to have to share the secret sauce on anything. And they're like, nah, we'll talk to you about it. Like, let's talk. We're open books. I was like, really? Wow. And I got talking to these guys. I'm like, wow, these are smart guys. Like, they're really making a difference in everything that they're doing every day. And I said, this is just where we need to be. I mean, I remember that moment as clear as day. It was like April of 2017.
That willingness to share in the RIA community was really the eye opener for both of us, because we would go to these conferences and we would be the only wirehouse people there. And, the wirehouse culture is just different. You're not having as many people that are coming out and sharing those ideas, right? It's kind of everyone's got a guarded approach. And so to be in the RIA space and be at these conferences as a wirehouse advisor and you're sharing ideas and best practices, it was just like a totally different mindset. And I think for both of us, it was eye-opening.
And this is skipping ahead a little bit to the independent chapter, the current chapter, but has it lived up to the promise? So being now on the independent side of the ledger, because that's something people worry about, especially captive wirehouse advisors. I like to some extent being left alone, but I also like that there's a community of like-minded advisors, there's events, blah, blah, blah. Do you feel like in the independent space that has lived up to what you were hoping, like this openness, this idea sharing, this collegiality?
Bigger community than I could have ever imagined anywhere. It's mind-blowing how we have collaborated, how we have calls with other advisory firms on a regular basis to share notes. And some of them are some of the biggest in the industries that everyone would know. And the president of those firms are willing to get on the phone with us and share some ideas about how we're doing things operationally, how they're doing things. We have lunches with these different advisory firms and the people who are running them too. And we all understand, right? And I think the big difference is we all have this different kind of niche that we serve. And I know niche is sometimes an overused word, but we're not trying to be everything to everybody. And there's more than enough clients for us to serve. And we're all looking to try to find the clients that we fit, and the clients are trying to find the firms that fit them. But at the same time, we can make this community and we can make financial planning and wealth management a better space by all collaborating together. And I knew it a little bit going in, like I told you that story in 2017, but it has exceeded the expectations we would have ever imagined. Because when you have that $7-10 billion firm and those people running that are willing to take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour out of their day to have a conversation with you, and you guys compare notes and have those conversations, you're like, wow, this is legit. It's the only way to describe it.
It matches my perception too, that there's for whatever reason, much more of a spirit of competition amongst the traditional firms, not just the wires. It's basically all the traditional wealth management players. And in the RIA space, I think culturally, and because there is this ethos of like, there's more than enough to go around, there's so much collegiality and coordination. So thank you for sharing that. So 2017, the wheels start turning. I start to see what's possible. Man, I can't unsee it. That's unbelievable. I think we belong there. How does the conversation then evolve to, I think we want to be in the RIA space? Like, walk us through your thinking and your process through due diligence to where you end up ultimately making a move.
We had that recognition, but we didn't have the clarity, right? The clarity of like, what direction should this go? Both Todd and I, we enjoy kind of getting into the weeds on these kind of things and understanding what is the best path forward. In 2017, it was like, all right, we really like the RIA community from what we've seen, but how do you get from A to B? So we just leaned into it and we spoke with various contacts that we had throughout the industry and just kind of piece things together, right? And there's different layers, there's different levels to independence, let's say. One of the things that we figured out was we want to have full ownership, right? We want to own our own ADV, but there's layers in between the wirehouse environment and owning your own ADVs. And so it was a winding road where we kicked the tires on a lot of different potential avenues that we could go. But at the end of the day, as we looked through everything and reviewed it, we just felt like that having that full independence and being truly in the RIA community, owning our own ADV, that was where we needed to be. It did take time, took a while.
When you look at it, it's not just like looking at jumping ship to another firm and seeing what the products and services are that they offer, right? I have some different feelings about that given I'm in the independent space. But at the end of the day, you have so many decisions to make and there's so many shades of gray for how you do this. It was a lot about education. We had to do so much research just to understand what all those different options were. And what's ironic is when we started this conversation in 2017 to when we broke away in 2023, the world evolved so much over 5 years, and the offerings and the opportunities and the tool sets that you could use have changed. And even since we did this in 23 to where we are today in 26, the world's changed again, and it's going to continue to evolve drastically. And the way you would have done it in 2017 is probably different than how we did it in 2023, because I think some of those options didn't really exist. But I think the core fundamental was the education, and at it, there's this bifurcation when you're deciding about going quote unquote independent. It's, are you going to own your own ADV or are you not going to go own your own ADV? And there's no right or wrong answer. You have to really look at what is right for your firm and what's involved in each of those decisions. Because I got to tell you, we've spoken to plenty of firms where people own their own ADVs and they're like, well, I don't think that was the right decision. We're going to probably look to go a different way. There's other people who are like, okay, we made one decision. Now maybe we want to own our own ADV. It evolves over time, but I think it has to go with really digging deep and understanding the implications of that decision, because that's going to drive all the other decisions you make going forward.
There's a lot to unpack there. I want to start, first of all, we're going to get to the ADV concept, and I want to know your thoughts on why you felt the need for own ADV versus the shared ADV model was so important. And maybe just for context for some of our listeners, the ADV is effectively just the concept that you register your RIA with the SEC, and the ADV is the form that's filed that says we are an RIA. So the two models that Joe and Todd are talking about are, on the one hand, you could launch your own ADV, your own SEC registered RIA. On the other hand, you could join a quote unquote shared ADV where you still maintain a lot of elements of independence, business ownership, equity ownership, data ownership, but you're offloading some support functions. So I just wanted to briefly provide that context. Let's come back to the ADV point. The other thing you mentioned, Joe, I like the word you used, was clarity, because there's a big gap between, yeah, we belong in the independent space, 2017, can't unsee it. And like, okay, now what? What do we do about all that? And we actually need to come up with an action plan. So was there something you can point to as like, that was the most helpful thing in gaining clarity? Or was it just taking meetings, trial and error?
It was definitely more the trial and error aspect. I think as we went through it, it was an evolution, right? So you're in a wirehouse, and even at first, maybe there was a conversation of, do we go somewhere else? Do we go to another wirehouse, right? And so it was a slow evolution where as we continued to go through these meetings and learn about what was going on, Todd and I, but also Steve and Julie, all four of us really felt that if we're going to do this, we might as well really take ownership of the entire thing. And that's why we made the ADV decision. Anyone who's considering it, you really just have to think about what are the pros and cons for your particular firm and what decision-making capability do you want to have. If you go fully independent and launch under your own ADV, you have decision-making power over everything. In the shared model, it's definitely, there's pros and cons. But when you go under the shared model, you take some of those decisions off of your plate, but you also lose the ability to make those decisions. If something's not going right, you're not happy with the service or something like that, you're sort of stuck. So I would just say it was an evolution. It wasn't like we woke up in 2017 and said, oh, we need to go full independence. We still had so much to learn. And like I said, right, I used the word clarity. And we just didn't have that. And until we dug into things and really started to understand the environment, we just, weren't going to make a decision.
I think, Jason, it's an interesting thing to look at is, why are you looking to go independent? Why are you looking to break away? Why are you looking to make this change? And you got to be honest with yourself about what it is. And for some people, that could be about getting a bonus check somewhere. For other people, that could be about gaining more independence for their clients. For other people, it could be about they want to expand their business lines. When you honest with yourself and you really dig deep about your why, you can start to gain clarity about what the answer is or what you're solving for. And I think that's a big part of it. And that was a big part of like when we started looking at us, why having our own ADV was the only solution for us.
I love that. For you, this was a question about what's the right flavor of independence. But even if it was a question of what's the next chapter in W2 world, or we want another wirehouse, I think the first step you need to take for clarity is introspective. And it meaning ask yourself the hard questions. What are we looking to solve for? Because we get asked sometimes like, what's the best model of independence? And Todd, I say what you just said, which is it depends. The best for what, right? There are things absolutely that you can do on your own ADV that you can't on a shared ADV. There are also benefits of the shared ADV model whereby you can offload. So what I want to touch on there though is there's this perception of having your own standalone RIA. We call it do-it-yourself independence, that you have to do every single thing yourself, right? I have to put the toner in the copy machine. I have to put the K-cups in the coffee thing, like order that, right? Are there outsourced options available? Like what degree do you feel like we're alone in this and it's just us and the custodian in that type of model?
Yeah, that's where I think there's been an evolution is because 2017, I don't think there were many options, but now there's a lot of intermediary options. Like you could have your own ADV, but you can choose to not do some of that stuff and you could outsource it, right? You could outsource to a CTO team. You could outsource to a compliance team. Like you could have a completely outsourced CCO, or you could hire a consultant if you want to do that. I mean, all these things add cost, of course, but you do have options where there's a lot of resources out there. I think when you're breaking away from the wirehouse, one of the tough things is that if you want to piece this together, you don't really know what you're piecing together. So I've seen this prevalence of bundled solutions that has emerged over the years. Again, there's a price you pay for that convenience, but maybe if you're breaking away from wirehouse, you're not used to doing this on your own, maybe that's a solution or that's an option for you. Whereas I find, after us being independent now for about 3 years, you learn so much by being in this every day. And we're looking for how we can obviously rearrange some of that on our end. And, we had done that originally, right, Jason? We had used a bundled solution when we were breaking away and it gave us a lot of clarity and a lot of convenience around it. But, I think we're looking now for how we start to piece that together and pick the providers that are right for us in the right space. And it's not that a bundled solution is bad. It's just that for us, we are very process driven. We want to control those processes just like we want to control our ADV. And so we are looking for ways that we don't have to have our accounting team dependent on our compliance consultant, dependent on who's doing our technology, for example, and be able to pick and choose who's the right provider in each of those spaces and how they all work together, so to speak.
And I want to play devil's advocate here. Like I'm going to use you as my example going forward because I have this conversation a lot about having your own RIA and what are the benefits. And you're the quintessential team to me where it was the right fit for you because you're process oriented, because you wanted to maintain control over every element of the chassis. One thing I would worry about if I was launching my own independent business, though, especially if I was doing it without some semblance of support partners, is the client experience. Tell me how your client experience has changed, either for better or worse, since leaving the wirehouse world.
I think the change has really been that we've been able to customize that and build that the right way. Now, again, there's advantages and disadvantages, and I'll get into more detail because being process oriented, we've been able to put together a process that delivers that and being able to go find the technology that helps us deliver that experience to our clients. We're fortunate too, we have the staff and team. We have, right, in our New York office alone, we have 1, 2, 3. We have about 5 or 6 of us that are in here helping support us. And that's something you have to really ask yourself. If you don't outsource, sometimes you have to insource and you have to have the staff to, make that happen in-house. But for example, the client experience when we were working at some of the other firms, again, at a wirehouse, the technology is laid out for you, right? Everything you're doing, how you're working on the front end. And that could be a good thing or bad thing, right? Because technology is very expensive. So these big firms and big wirehouses can sometimes have a lot of money they could throw at these things and they have a lot of scale and that could be a good thing. So I'm not always trying to be negative about that. But what we have found is that we drew out a very specific plan for how we want our client experience to look, how we wanted to introduce clients to the firm. Because what we wanted clients to do is we wanted them to get a real chance to understand who we are and how we work. Not just like, let's go on a date and do we want to get married? It's okay, let's give you an idea about what it's like to work with us. Let's have some conversations up front. Let's show you the kind of questions we ask. Let's show you the one-page financial plan that we put together that helps you visualize your whole life and have a conversation around that. So before we even get into the real hardcore financial planning for clients, we've already done a lot of preliminary upfront financial planning for them in a real easy to see, easy to view way of, okay, here's what we have. Here's the resources you have. Here's how you can shift around some of these pieces of the puzzle. And I think what's interesting is at some of the environments where we were a little more limited in the advice we could deliver, that's where we kind of have to stop because that was kind of the financial planning aspect of it. But here we get into not just tax planning, but tax advice, right? We have people who can give tax advice in our firm. We have platforms that could deliver the estate planning experience to clients. We are going so much more in depth. And so we're taking that initial little plan. And then what we're doing is we're digging so much deeper into what we can deliver and what the actual advice is. That I think is where we've been okay doing so much more work up front for people. But we want them to get comfortable with us. We want them to see how we work. We want them to see how we look at the world, because what we're finding is when a client comes on board, we want them to feel comfortable enough that we're signing on for a longer term relationship. We're not locking them into that. We want them to feel like they're getting into a relationship that they could stay around for a long time with, because financial planning, especially the way that we're doing it, it's not just us. I mean, a lot of these RAs are expanding their basis because they're going much broader than, the traditional, let's call them more focused firm would be. It takes time to do all that work. It's taking almost 6, 7, 8 months for a new client just to get through all the tax return work and deliver the advice and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of work up front, and we want to be able to deliver that for clients. So we want to make sure that they know what they're getting into when it comes to it.
Yeah, thanks for the specifics there too. I always love that. You gave real tangible examples, so thank you. And Joe, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I just think, Todd talked a little bit about the tech stack. And I think that's one of the things, right? When you think about the client experience and the ability as fully independent to create the tech stack that you want to provide things to clients, I think that's a real big advantage. I think it helps deliver a much more tailored, much more customized client experience. But one thing that when Todd was talking, he's talking about, the budget that some of the wirehouses can throw behind things like technology and things like that. I always found it interesting, but you would have the ability to do all these crazy reports where you're running all these different simulations and VAR simulations and things like that. And it's like, sometimes there's a lot of beauty and simplicity, especially when you're dealing with clients who are not in, who don't have a financial background, right? And so now, oh yeah, let me give you this. I can do this crazy report with all these simulations, VAR simulations, Monte Carlo simulations. But at the end of the day, like they just want to see a very simple, sometimes they want to see a one-page document. Like, what is my balance sheet? What do I look like here? And what can I do? And having that ability to, sort of dial up the technical aspects when needed is great. But then you also need to be able to do, have that beauty and the simplicity there.
It's a great answer. There's an element to this of the wirehouses don't necessarily want to embrace like, I'll give you another example that comes to mind would be, we just want to write timely communications or video messages to our clients. That's not something that historically the wirehouses have been comfortable with, right? You're both laughing as I say this, which I guess tells you I wasn't kidding, but I guess it was a little bit funny, which tells you all you need to know. And even something like that, it's like complexity is not going to solve that. You could have the greatest tech budget and the most involved platform on the planet. That's just not built into the fabric of that type of model.
So Jason, it's interesting you mentioned that, because at one of the wirehouses we were at, I got invited to do TV a lot and media. And the wirehouse told me once I was media trained, I could go do that. I said, okay, well, let me get media trained. Well, they said, well, that program doesn't exist. You allow it, but you just don't have the program to allow me to do it.
It's a nice common sense approach to things. It's exactly right. It's like the applying for an internship for an 18-year-old where you need 5 years of experience. Let's shift gears here a little bit. I want to talk now about kind of the nuts and bolts of what you do more. So Todd, maybe I'll direct this one at you. Your background is obviously more in the, call it institutional caliber investment management space. It seems like now you're leaning more into like the behavioral, emotional client side of things. Is that the secret sauce of all of this? Is it that you marry those two elements together?
I think any wealth management firm or advisory firm or even investment firm is going to be well served by looking at the behavioral side of things. My background is actually in like physiology, right? My degree is in science, and I was going to go to medical school when I graduated. So I've always been very fascinated with how the human brain looks and how it processes information. I think it was a really eye-opening situation because I'm a chartered market technician too. And if you look at the core of being a charter market technician, right? Why do these charts work, right? Why do we not have the random walk? And I'm not looking to debate all this, but I just want to kind of talk about where my ethos comes from a little bit, right? And where I'm grounded in, because why do stocks reach insane valuations? We believe it's because there's these behavioral dynamics that are at work within the market, right? People chase a stock, a big stock that continues to go up and go up on, the hyper belief that things can always get better, right? It's the same thing why there's stocks that go down that people can chase forever, and they keep going lower despite the fact that they should have some value in them. And we've all seen this happen over time. And it goes back to these behavioral financial theories with people, right? They don't behave in rational ways. And we're not saying people are irrational in the way that we think about it, but they don't behave the way a textbook says they should behave, right? And by the way, that's great that they don't, because that's what makes us interesting as humans. If we all behave the way a textbook said we should behave, we'd all be the same and nothing would be interesting about any of us. So I think that's a really important part of it. But it's allowed me to take this love of the science background and start to apply this to, it started out with just our investment concepts and how we started designing these investment tools, because we're very process driven in our investment world. Everything's driven by data and tools and rule sets and things like that are foundational in these behavioral theories. But what we found is it's not just investments. It's how people make all their financial decisions, how they decide where they're going to spend money or why they're not spending money. And what, is wealthy look like to someone like you? Because how client A describes wealth is different than how client B and client C describe wealth. And that starts to align with what their values are. So how do we create this process? How do we identify people's values? How do we get to answering the real questions for what people are asking us? Because we see people come to us a lot and they're like, oh my gosh, the market's, going up. I need to get better returns, or the market's down. I can't ever own things again. And I've seen these articles about advisors talking about how they have to be psychologists. And I'm not trying to be a psychologist. I'm not trying to talk people into doing things. What I'm trying to do is create plans and create investment models that allow people to live in a world where they're more comfortable with, so that I don't have to convince them to stick with their plan or convince them to stick with their investment strategy. That should be more tailored to an environment that allows them to naturally do it. And a lot of that has to do with things like, okay, well, someone calls you and they're afraid that they're not keeping track with the market, or they're afraid that they're going down too much. There's something more going on there sometimes. Maybe it's that they know retirement's on the horizon. They're concerned about their job and they think getting more return is the answer to those kinds of things. Or if they don't lose any more money, right? Maybe that means they don't have to worry about if they lose their job, they're not, going to have enough money to pay the bills. Whatever it is, there's usually something underlying that goes back to their lives, something that has more meaning and value. It's usually not about the numbers. And so I think that the psychological side of it is so important in understanding that. But how do we use those tools? How do we work with different organizations that have perfected ways in identifying those things? And that's been a really cool endeavor for us to go down and identify some of the really, I think, forward-looking or revolutionary tools in that space that have allowed us to tailor a client experience in ways that I could have only imagined just even, 4 or 5 years ago.
Very thoughtful, thorough answer. I think, unfortunately, it's parts of that strategy are probably difficult for the average advisor to replicate who doesn't have your background. But I think there's a lot there. I loved what you said specifically around like when somebody's calling all the time saying, why is my portfolio going down so much? Maybe there's something deeper underlying it. And I don't think you need a psychology degree or a science degree to kind of have an element of emotional intelligence around that. And that's always been the case of a financial advisor. Is the role has always been part in the markets, analytical. At the end of the day, people do want to see returns. They care about financial planning, but it is part, whatever you want to call it, therapist, scientist, emotional, as well. Joe, let's talk now for a second about, if you can remember the transition period, what challenges did you encounter and anything that surprised you?
The primary challenge is you're trying to pick up an entire business and move it under a new entity, right? And kick things off right from there. And so there's obviously concern maybe going into it, like, how does this look? How does this go? How does the actual transition to the custodial platform go? How do clients react? And then I personally felt like we could definitely we were going to be able to do this. We had done enough due diligence that I felt very strongly that this was where we belonged and we were making the right decision. But there's always going to be that little element of like, okay, what if this goes sideways, right? So handling that transition is really just a matter of like, you have to handhold every relationship, right? You really have to kind of put your arms around your people and say, look, this is what's happening. This is how we're going to do it. And you kind of just have to dig in and do the work. I would say the area that I don't want to say that I was really surprised, but it was like very nice to encounter was just how many of our clients were incredibly supportive of this. I felt that they would be, but one after the next, as we were going through the phone calls and talking to people, everyone's like, this is great. We're so excited for you guys. We're happy to be on board, looking forward to the future. Maybe that's not for everybody's business. I don't know. But like, I know I've heard that story over and over again from other advisors that have broken away from wirehouse and gone independent. And it's almost hard to believe pre-breakaway, but everybody was telling us, you guys are going to be amazed at the reaction. People are going to love it. And then you actually kind of see it happen. It was really just like a nice thing to see people that you built a business around that you care about. And then they're turning around and they're saying,
that's got to be super energizing too. Cause I imagine like I'm playing this out in my head. It's the night before my transition. I'm probably not sleeping that great thinking about all those conversations. And I think a lot more advisors would have moved if you could, with 100% certainty, know your clients were going to follow, right? That's what at its core advisors worry about. And so those conversations are uncomfortable. You're asking clients to undergo change. And what you're saying is not only did they say, okay, they actually went a step further and embraced it. And we hear that commonly. I think it's also like people forget a lot of their clients are real people too, and they're business owners in their own right. And they kind of understand your mentality and your ethos.
100%. And I think we do have a significant number of business owners or former business owners in our book of business. And I think that was definitely a big reason for that reception that we got, where they understood what we were doing and they had been there in their own professional life, where maybe they were at a firm one day and they went out and started their own business and they experienced all of that we were experiencing now. And they kind of knew what lied ahead for us to a certain degree. And yeah, the reception was just tremendous, and like you said, incredibly energizing. I think back to those first, whatever couple months, whatever. Yeah, I'll be in the office 7 days a week or whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, because you had that burst of energy and then having that client support, you're just like, yeah, let's get this done. Let's move forward and let's build.
Yeah. That's very common feedback. I don't mean to say common because I think that's special and it's rare, but I mean, we hear that a lot from advisors who underwent a successful transition of like, I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life, but it was the most fun I've had, at least in the last 20 years. And it sounds like that's what you're saying. Todd, I'm going to throw this one to you. Everything you're saying is positive, independence. It seems like by all metrics, size, client success, happiness, the move was a tremendous success. Does that lead me to believe that you are bearish on the wirehouse space, or do you still feel like there's a place for the wirehouses in the current ecosystem?
Everyone's got to find their place. Every advisor's got to find their place. And what we did is not for everybody, because what Joe's talking about, working 7 days a week, we were working 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, right? For that first 6 months. And it didn't tail off that much for the next 6 months after that either, because at the end of the day, right? It's our firm. You're working for yourself and that's energizing. But at the same time, there's a lot of work that goes into this and you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because you don't know what tomorrow brings. And you're going to learn a lot of lessons along the way about things like, okay, how does, paid family leave and disability work in the state of New York, right? And what insurance policies should you have? And all these things that you never, ever had to think about before. So when you look at that, you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I say that because that's not for everybody. And that's perfectly fine, right? It's not like this is right versus one other way is right. And, it's like when advisors argue about fee structures, there's no right or wrong answer, right? Everyone does things differently and clients are going to find the person that works for them. And I think that that's why people got to be honest with themselves about what their why is and what they're trying to achieve and what they're trying to accomplish. And I think you got to look introspectively. I think though, that what's happening in this world is that there's becoming many blurred lines, because we talk about the wirehouses, but I think many of these, let's call it regional Firms that were once small RIAs are now pushing up to be borderline wirehouses, like mini wirehouses and stuff like that.
You're referring, I assume, to like Raymond James and RBC.
A variety of other firms that have gotten, bigger in their time, maybe even they were smaller than that and moving up. So, but to your point, there's a lot of different ranges about aggregators and wirehouses and things like that when you look at it. And again, it's not a right or wrong answer, but I think that what's happening is we got to look at what's changing and how the world's changing and who has the ability to serve them. And we heard on the wirehouse side, even from our colleagues who were there, one of the things we're seeing is fee compression from that space. Because realistically, even with this advent of AI, is that investment management, things like that are being democratized a little bit. I mean, Vanguard did this too, right? And you saw robo advisors. It's not ending the advisor, but certainly for advisors that are more myopic in what they offer, I think those are the kinds of things that make it very difficult. And when we look at the wirehouse community, I think what happens is that those advisors themselves are experiencing fee compression, at least anecdotally from what we've seen and from industry reports from what we've seen, is because of the fact that really it starts to be about an investment conversation. Now, there's other areas of the bank and stuff that they sell, and there's a lot of cross-selling that goes along, which is profitable for the bank itself. But not all the advisors are benefiting, within that space. I think what's happening is that in the RIA community, we don't see, or at least anecdotally, and from some of the reports I read, we don't see the same level of fee compression. The firms themselves can offer more robust advice, and not just advice, but actually actionable execution on that advice. So it's not just about, hey, listen, here's your investments, or we think your 401k should be allocated this way. We actually have tools to go manage your 401k. We can actually handle your taxes. We can actually prepare a mock tax return, right? Because investors are equating that to, perceiving value, and they are getting value. They're getting more for, what they're paying. So I think, Jason, it's not about being bearish on wirehouses versus RIAs. I think it's being bearish or more skeptical of areas where they have more limited advice to be able to deliver to clients. And the firms that are able to offer more robust advice to clients and more comprehensive advice and action to clients are the ones that are going to, I think, be okay. And ultimately, that's where AI isn't going yet, right? AI could tell you what to do, but it can't execute it for you. It still has to be done. And that's where I think the humans are bringing a lot of value, to the table. So that's how we have to start looking at that future. Who can execute? Who can give that advice? Who's going to be more robust and dynamic in what they can do there? And that's going to be the differentiator. Whether that's a wirehouse or whether that's an RIA, that's how you have to look at it.
It's a really thoughtful perspective. And I largely agree with you, by the way. And I'd even go so far as to say, like, the wirehouses are not going anywhere. I think they're going to continue to have success because there's some advisors too who just need or want the brand and support, and, or to your point, don't have the entrepreneurial spirit or the drive. I also agree completely with what you're saying that part of the antidote or the cure for fee compression is what I call ancillary services. Like, if you accept the premise that financial planning and investment management and asset custody are table stakes, that everybody has those things, then it's about what else can you offer? And it's harder to offer the things you're describing, tax and trust and estate and things like that, in the captive model. So I agree with that. It's a really thoughtful answer. I appreciate the perspective. It's been a really fun conversation. We have time for one more. I'm going to give it to both of you. As firms grow, and I think you're at that point now where you're now, I wouldn't say a mature independent business, but you're getting there. Growth, obviously, you start to hit that kind of J curve. And with growth comes good and bad. What's a non-negotiable when you think about the future of your firm?
Go for it.
So when I look at the future of our firm and I look at it, firms look at growth in different ways. And I think we're coming out of a period of growth where it's been a lot of growth by acquisition in this environment. And that's raised some of its own challenges for firms, right? It's allowed a lot of firms to scale up very quickly, and it's been very beneficial. Again, there's no right or wrong answer in this space. Yep. I think for us, it's about making sure that the culture of the individuals that we're bringing in is in alignment with our firm. So, it's really important in this day and age because I've learned on many interviews, in the history of my life, and spoken to many different, firms and everything like that. And it's kind of funny, in this field, the biggest interview questions are like, okay, how much assets do you have and how much can you move over? Right? That's a question. And none of it's really about like, okay, well, how does this fit culturally together with the firm? Does this really align? And I think that becomes the most important part of it is how does everyone fit together and how's it aligned? Because we can take care of the asset problem, we can take care of the growth issues, but we need people who are moving in the right direction and can see that vision together.
Yeah.
So I think that starts to be the non-negotiable for us is like that cultural alignment. I know that has become a little bit of a buzzword in this industry, but that supersedes everything else. I think where an industry has been so focused on assets, growth, and clients, where that needs to be secondary to making sure that everyone in here, is taken care of and wants to stay and, wants to work towards an achievable goal. Because, people have to be intrinsically motivated. They have to believe in what they're building and what they're working towards to really make that happen.
It's great. And honestly, buzzword or not, it's the good firms are the ones that actually walk the walk and talk the talk in that regard. Because a lot of firms say culture matters until you're presented with a huge opportunity. So it's fair to use the buzzword and then back it up with what you do as you grow. So I appreciate the perspective. Joe, anything you would add?
Yeah, I think just expanding on the concept of culture, totally agree. That's the bedrock of how you build a firm, right? But I think when we think more specifically about our firm here, Todd and I we both stress education and continued learning. And I think that's a really big thing for us. Think about as we move forward, I want people who will invest the time and the effort to go get a designation. We'll support that as a firm, right? We will support if you want to get multiple designations. We have no problem with that. We want to do that because we want people to have that learned experience behind them that they can then take into conversations with clients and actually translate into, real world advice. And, we can argue over, AI over the past few, even just this week, right? With how much of that gets like commoditized and whatnot. We could argue over that all day. At the end of the day, I still think you want to have people that have that educational foundation. So that way, when they're going into these conversations with clients and they get, a complex question thrown at them, they have some resource to go back and fall back on and feel confident in giving an answer, even if that answer is, I need to do more research, right? You have to be able to say that to people. I think it's very important. So I think just with that cultural aspect, just having that, internal curiosity and that inquisitive nature to keep learning and keep going and bettering yourself in your career.
Thank you both so much. This has been an absolute blast. I can't wait to have you both back on and hear about that and how you deliver on the growth and the promise. But I think off to a fantastic start, and I'm excited about the future of SYKON Capital. So thank you both for joining.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibilities seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.